Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Christopher Donald, and I'm going to be doing a demo today on using stamps and texture rollers and how to make them. I use quite a bit of this in my work. There's basically three different categories here that I'm going to talk about. The first one are clay stamps, where you just make the original out of clay with the reverse of what you want the stamp to look like after you use it, and you simply bisque fire these. Once they're bisque fired, they're a little bit more sturdy, they're still somewhat porous, and you can use them for doing decorative stamping on your work. There's a little variety of them here. I'll show you how these ones look. So I have some that are a little bit fancier, like this one is a leaf. I have some that are a little bit larger, like that one. And the ones that I probably get the most mileage out of are the ones which are a little bit simpler. They're just a basic pattern or shape, and I get a little bit more mileage using these than I tend to do the ones that are more specific. But up to you which shapes you think you would want to do. So I have these basic stamps, and then I also have what are called sprig molds. And sprigs are a little bit basically like one extra step than using just a stamp. Generally, with a sprig mold, you also have to add a little bit of clay. So sprigs are a little bit deeper, and simply stamping them into a flat clay isn't going to really give you the shape. So what you would do, and these ones are also just made out of fired clay. So I would take and score, add a little bit of water there, score it again, add my fresh piece of clay. Let me do two of these since a little bit extra water there. All right. So now that I've got a little bit of extra added, that will actually go into this deep sprig mold. And then when I do it, I'll get the entire stamp that I want. Where if I don't add the clay first, I won't get the entire stamping. So that's a sprig mold. So these are the ones that you can make just from clay. I also have, these are texture rollers. Again, these are just made out of clay. And they're just made so that the pattern goes all the way around, and they can be used for doing decorative banding. These were used often with a group of techniques called moko-ware. They did a lot of decorative banding on things. And this can be a really nice option. Another thing that I like about these ones, the rolling ones, is that they can kind of do dual duty. So not only can they be used for doing a rolled stamping, but they can be used as a stamp, and you can do multiple types of patterns with them. So they kind of have a double option as far as how useful they are. So I can actually do like a repeat pattern with them as well. All right, so I got my texture rollers. I've got sprig molds, which are a little bit more three-dimensional. Another thing you can, honestly, I should mention this with the sprig molds, is that it's common for people to simply just press out the sprig, let that get to early leather hard, and then just add them. If you let them get to early leather hard, you won't mess up the design, the texture that's on there. All right, my sprigs, got my stamps. And the other one that I should mention how to make here are these rollers. So there's kind of, again, two different versions of this. The first one would be just making it out of clay. So let's start with that. So I would just make a strip of clay. I can do this by hand. I can do this using a rolling pin. Kind of up to you. Find my rolling pin here. I do not recommend making them any thinner than a quarter of an inch, because you want them to be able to absorb a little bit of moisture, and you want them to be sturdy enough that you can keep reusing them. So if you make them too thin, they won't be very absorbent and they won't be very durable. So there's no reason to make them thin. Best to make them a thickness that you feel you can bend around in a circle, but is also going to be durable. All right, so I'll just go ahead and use this ruler width because that's convenient. There we go. Little tile making trick. You can always clean up the edges of things by pushing your ruler or a stick up against them and then just kind of rolling it over. Which works really good for this specific thing anyway. All right, now I've got a strip, and now I would decide what repeat pattern do I want to put on here to make a texture roller. One trick is to actually use one of your stamps and just do a repeat of the stamp, so that way when you want to do a big field of that, you don't need to do it like again and again and again with the stamp. So I could make this whole thing bullseyes, or I could make it leaves, or I could make it little dots. Whatever I want, I could actually make it on this. Whatever you do on here, though, keep in mind, this is going to create the thing you push into it. So by pushing this in, I'm making an opposite. By making the opposite, I'm making a roller which will create this. It will look like this. It won't look like what this creates. Your brains are like shutting off. So this stamp makes this kind of a mark. But if I put that mark into here, it's going to create its opposite. It will be a raised version. It will look like the end of the stamp. So making stamps is actually a way of making the opposite of the stamp in either a roller or, like, let's say I decided, hey, I really like this stamp, but I really like the opposite of the stamp. Let's make another stamp. Let's just move him out of harm's way for a sec here. I like to do little spirals on my stamp handles, basically just so that people know they're mine. And it's also a little texture that lets you hold on to it a little bit better. And it's become my thing, so 3 reasons. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cut the end of this off. Make that nice and even. There we go. Then I can take my previous stamp and I can stamp the end of this one with that. Then I would probably want to carefully kind of bevel away from the bit that's going to be pushed into the clay so that I don't have a large flat area here and getting in the way of it being able to push in and do the stamping. I generally just do that with a paddle. I can also clean that up even a little bit more precisely once this is leather hard. But at this stage, while it's soft like this is going to be about as good as I can get. Remember to do things at the stage that makes sense for what you're making and not just get impatient and try and force the issue too early on in the process. All right, so that excuse me. So this now is this will produce this, and this produces that. So now I have 2 stamps for the same pattern, but one of them is reversed. Okay, so the little sidetrack there from doing my pattern roller, but I wanted to mention that. I think that's important. So if I want to do a roller here, let's say, oh, I do like making ruler ones. They always amuse me because they look really cool and all they are is a ruler. We'll go ahead and do one with a ruler again. All right, so I might do something like this. And this will almost look like a feather once it's rolled in. In doing pattern rollers, often you're just using things that are pretty everyday and they might even be objects that you overlook. They don't have to be fancy objects to create an interesting pattern or an interesting texture. I'm constantly, when I'm doing workshops or demos, just picking up random objects and just using them in interesting ways. I think sometimes we forget about just simple concepts that we learned in 2 and 3D design classes about just repetition and making things into interesting patterns. All right, so I've got the pattern in my strip here. Now I'm going to want to bend this around. And I've made my life a little bit complicated with this specific pattern. It's not a linear pattern, so I would actually need to, honestly, it's going to be easier to do this way. What I would do is I would cut a bevel at the pattern. I want to try and find the easiest way to clean this up. And it looks like the easiest way to clean this up is going to be to just make it so that the pattern comes together at itself. So I'll cut one bevel in one direction, and then an under bevel in the other direction here. I can score those. And then that way, when I put it together, I'm cleaning up the seam at a pattern, at part of the pattern, which will be a lot easier to hide. You do have to think about that a little bit when you're doing this. And just like the stamp, I'll do some of it at this stage, but then I'll let it get leather hard. There we go. So hopefully you can see I did it right where that V is. So after this sets, I can carefully come back and just clean that up. Clean up the ones where I had to put a little bit of pressure on it. And while this is so soft, I don't want to go touching this a lot. Let this get to early leather hard. Clean up your seam, your pattern on the seam, and biscuit. And you've got a pattern roller. It's a really effective way of making these. Here's another one I did earlier. This is again with the ruler, where I basically just took and stuck in slots like that and made a completely different pattern. All right, so this one was done with this tool, with the ruler, and start over here. So this one was also done with the ruler. Gives me a completely different pattern, and it'd be just another interesting one for rolling out after it's bisque fired. Okay, now if you create a roller, a pattern roller like this, you can also create, again, the opposite of that pattern roller by basically just using the roller, just like you did the stamp. And I would make a length of material. I'm going to make a short length. I don't really need to make a whole bunch of these, but just so that you can see an example here. There we go. So I would use this one to roll in the pattern. Then I would trim it, and this would create a pattern roller, a bisque pattern roller, where it will make this look. So this will create its opposite, which will look like this. This one, where they're indented, creates this on the clay. So you can always make both versions of the same pattern roller. Another way that you can do it is if you want to have a plaster version, which would be something like this. You would do your pattern, say this one, again, was from rulers. I basically just took the edge of a ruler and just kept sticking it in and made it look like scales. You would create that, and then you turn it inside out. You finish the seam. You put a piece of plastic around it at least once or twice. Probably like tape works really good, just packing tape. Then you would put a coil along the bottom so that you're keeping the liquid plaster inside this ring that you've made, and then you fill it with plaster. When you're casting things that have a lot of texture like this, though, make sure you get a soft brush. You kind of brush against the texture wall a little bit to try and release the air bubbles. You'd also want to make sure you could vibrate it to get the air pockets to come up off of the detail. When you're casting them, you just want to make sure you don't get any of those air bubbles attached to the thing that you're going to be trying to roll out later. So you can make them out of plaster as well. And if you make a plaster one, you can use the plaster to create a clay one. And so if I roll the plaster under the clay, and then I turn this way, the right way out, and bisque fire it, it will then make a roller that creates these points. So you can always go back and forth with whichever thing it is that you're trying to create. So I just wanted to go over these as a tool for you guys, because I use them often in creating my work. So I mean, I must have dozens of these stamps, and I used to teach this quite a bit. Most of my classes, we always started with clay stamps, especially the hand building classes, and then we do clay rollers. Uh, they're a really nice tool for giving you interest and texture, and another option for the outsides of your work. When you're working with plaster molds or hump molds, stamps are fantastic because you have the mold supporting the clay, and you can just stamp into it while it's supported. Then you can put a foot on it, so that you can get a lot of mileage out of these. Anyhow, thanks for joining me, and make sure to subscribe, and you'll be alerted to new videos as they drop. And I'll see you back here again soon. Take care. Bye.